what they're trying to do here? Because people say, if you say it's going to be so awful, what the hell are you doing raising interest rates or borrowing costs?
Well, I'm afraid you're going to have to ask an economist that, because I slightly struggle too on why, when we have a supply side economic problem, that we are pushing demand down so hard. But I'm a consumer finance expert, not an economist, so I wouldn't claim an expertise on that subject.
Okay, fair enough. So they put interest rates up by 0.75%. That's the biggest rise in one go in over 33 years. What will be the immediate consequences of that?
Well, of course, we are a split nation, and we need to understand that we're a split nation. There are many people with debts and mortgage debts out there for whom interest rate rises are always going to be a negative. So if you are on a variable rate mortgage, a discount mortgage, or a tracker mortgage, a 0.75% percentage point rise in interest rates equates to roughly £40 per month per £100,000 of outstanding debt. That's the increase that would be likely to see on a typical repayment mortgage. So if you have a £200,000 mortgage, expect it to be £80 a month. If you're on a fixed rate mortgage, as the vast majority of people are, then nothing happens until your fix ends. What I'd urge people to do is make sure you know now the date when your fixed rate ends. I would have a note in your diary 6 months before that point. That's the point to start thinking about what you're going to do, so that you can be in place 3 months before your mortgage ends.
Because that's going to be quite a shock for some people, because some people will have fixed their mortgage 2 or 3 years ago when interest rates are 2%, and they'll be coming out to a world of 6%. So that's going to be a very big rise in
It's going to be an absolutely enormous shock for most people. I mean, we're talking in that perspective, again, using the same equation before, each percentage you rise is £60 per month per £100,000 of mortgage. So, you know, we're talking getting on that for 800 quid a year, and you times that by a rise for many people of 5%, up to 5% on their mortgage. Well, I mean, we're talking £4,000 a year per 100,000 in some cases at the extreme end. But the biggest range is going to be a horrendous shock for people. So people do need to absolutely be preparing that now. I mean, we may see fixed rates coming off. They have come off slightly from where they were before. And of course, they won't have gone up on the back of yesterday's news. Most of that was baked into fixed rates, which tend to move more with gilts and swap rates than they move with the rate that the Bank of England is setting. But what's also interesting and perverse out there is longer fixes are tending to be a bit cheaper than shorter fixes. So fixing for 10 years looks, in relative terms, competitive at the moment. And something I didn't ever think I would say, but in many cases we're finding the cheapest mortgage deals at the moment are in some cases coming from product transfers, coming from your own lender rather than going across the whole market. So the whole way that
getting rewarded for loyalty for once.
Well, or not getting penalised for shifting outside into a competitive area.
Yeah.
But I would strongly suggest, I mean, this is the time when mortgage brokers earn their money. So anybody who is coming to the end of their fix or has got a variable deal and wants to see what they can do, this is the time that you should be going to speak to a mortgage broker. And they tend to have more details, because there's a big problem about affordability as well, more details about what's acceptable than is available to the general public, because this is when they're worth their weight.
As you pointed out, we're split into savers as well. I just wonder, is there any evidence that, you know, the banks and the building sites are dragging their heels in raising the rates they're paying their savers at the same time?
There's absolutely no evidence, apart from leaving enough to fill about 25 different national newspapers. I mean, it's absolutely transparent, plain, has always been that way and will always be that way, unless we have any form of regulation brought in to make sure that doesn't happen. The average UK easy access savings account is around 0.75%. The top on the market, changed yesterday, is 2.55% with Tandem and Chip, although there are some issues with the fact that the interest in that isn't FSCS protected. So yeah, look, savings is very plain. If you have savings in a big bank right now, then you will not be getting, in most cases, any benefit of UK interest rate rises. The only way to get that benefit is to become an active, aggressive, in terms of the way you treat people, saver, that's constantly looking, constantly shifting, constantly moving. I mean, most people are earning diddly squat, spit-worthily low rates of less than 1%, whereas you can get fixes right now at 5% where you lock your money away, top easy access 2.55% available to all, but some limited accounts offering 5% or 3% if you're doing it linked to your bank account. There are some decent savings deals available out there, but if you do not go out hunting for them, you will not get them.
Okay.
And you absolutely need to be on top of that. But when we say split nation, 190 billion pounds of extra money was built up in savings during the pandemic. People who have that money are sitting on it and often allowing the banks to give them absolutely diddly squat for it. And we need to stop the savings rip-off.
Okay, Martin, being passionate as always, being out there, being aggressive, so we don't have to be. Thank you very much for that.
It's 5 to 9. The Prime Minister, many other leaders, campaigners, celebrities, thousands of delegates head to Egypt for the next round of climate talks. And as they do so, there are again searing examples of how the climate is already changing and what that means for land and people. Let's bring together 3 correspondents to talk about what they're seeing. Nick Beake has just been reporting from the Arctic. Katie Watson's been covering the election in Brazil and what it means for the Amazon jungle. And Andrew Harding here in the studio with me has had a series of reports on BBC Radio and television from Somalia, which is in the grip of a terrible drought. And of course the irony is that that is happening so close relatively to where delegates will be meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Yes, practically just down the road, and you have millions of people on the move. You have an entire way of life out in the countryside in Somalia coming to an end because of climate change. This is a country really in the jaws of climate change and millions of people suffering. And yet, Somalia, what it really fundamentally illustrates is how difficult it is to help the countries that are feeling the most acute impact of our changing climate, because Somalia is at war, and war linked to climate change, the fight over precious resources as the country becomes more arid, as crops fail, as droughts and flooding become more often, more hard to predict and more extreme. And you have a country that's so poor and institutions, crucially, that are so weak that they're not good at absorbing the sort of money, the pots of money that African countries are understandably demanding in Sharm el-Sheikh and saying, you caused our struggles with your emissions of CO2, help us to fix them. Plenty of African countries have plans and can absorb those funds, but places like Somalia and across the Sahel, the driest places, the places really hurting because of climate change just below the Sahara, they can't, frankly, absorb the money.
Katie, what's the perspective from Brazil, where there's a new president, of course, or at least a president-elect? Is he going to COP?
His head of party has confirmed he is going to COP, but of course Bolsonaro's administration will also represent. But I think this year it's a return for Brazil to multilateral relations. The fact that Lula talked about the Amazon in his campaign. He was up against a man who was accused of destroying it. Deforestation is at a 15-year high, and it's accelerating, as well as illegal mining, threats on indigenous people within the forest. He's made campaign promises to end all of this and defend indigenous rights, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see much more talking rather than cutting out the conversation when it comes to climate change. Already funds such as the Amazon Fund that was created while Lula was president and operations were frozen under Bolsonaro. Norway's climate and environment minister has said that will be resumed. So I think the fact that Brazil's coming back into the kind of international community to talk about what can be done in the forest is seen as a very good thing, not just for Brazil, of course, but for the world.
And Nick, for anyone who didn't see your pieces on the television, what did you find in the Arctic?
Morning, Michelle. Yeah, we went to Svalbard, the Norwegian archipelago, because it's said to be warming at 6 times the global average, and the threat to Arctic wildlife we know is well documented, but we found that also human life is now in a struggle to survive there because they're having to move their homes, rebuild them. The ground beneath them is melting, it's less stable, and so it's very precarious. And I think of what people in the Arctic will be hoping to get from COP27 is something on reducing emissions further, a reduction of coal, because what really struck me, Michelle, was this top expert who was talking to us. We were at the foot of a glacier, and he said even if by magic emissions were to stop today, we've committed our world to another 20 years of warming, which sort of put it in perspective for me.
That is really sobering. Andrew, just a final thought from you. It feels as if we're a long way from anything they agree in Sharm el-Sheikh making a difference to the people you saw in Somalia.
Yes, in these big camps that are forming outside the big cities, the big towns, makeshift camps full of all these people fleeing, abandoning, frankly, forever their way of life.
Because they can't grow their crops.
Because they can't grow their crops, because these are middle class people as well. Remember, these are not the sort of the poorest of the poor. These people had money in the form of cattle, in the form of livestock, but they've been bankrupted by climate change, by the worst drought in 40 years. Now they're destitute. But they know nothing, essentially, of climate change and nothing of COP. These are communities that simply don't have access to that kind of information.
Andrew Harding, thank you, and thanks also to Nick Peake and to Katie Watson.
Our editors were Victoria Gardner, Joshua Schell, Studio Director Lee Wilson. Good morning.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. The government could abandon or delay major energy and transport projects when it announces its autumn statement later this month. The BBC understands that plans to build a new rail line across northern England are being reconsidered. The construction of the Sizewell C power station in Suffolk is also believed to be under review. A Treasury spokesperson has insisted infrastructure projects remain a priority. Dr. Paul Dorfman is chair of the Research Institute, the nuclear consulting group. Speaking to Today, he said the government should be prioritising renewables over nuclear.
Because it is such a costly endeavour, the money could be better spent elsewhere. Nuclear costs run about 20 to 100% over budget, with build times of between 13 to 17 years, much too late for energy or climate issues.
The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, told Today that scrapping Sizewell C could be problematic for the government.
If they're not going to finance a new nuclear power plant, they have to answer what else they're going to do for zero-emission, so-called baseload energy to meet the needs of the UK economy in the future.
Some households with smart meters will be offered discounts on their energy bills if they use less electricity during peak times. Participants will be asked to turn on appliances during off-peak hours instead. The scheme will be tested in England, Scotland and Wales on 12 days between now and March. The aim is to help alleviate pressure on the network. The Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says there will be no Stormont election before Christmas. He's legally obliged to call a vote within 12 weeks of October the 28th, after a deadline to restore power sharing was missed. Mr. Heaton-Harris said he would set out more details in Parliament next week. China's President Xi Jinping has told the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz there should be greater cooperation between their two countries for the sake of world peace. Mr. Scholz is the first leader of a G7 country to visit Beijing since the start of the pandemic. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. Good morning. In 3/4 of an hour, we're looking at whether the COVID pandemic has inadvertently stoked the popularity of extreme conspiracy theorists. Mariana Spring asks, who believes this stuff, in Disaster Trolls at 9:45. Now though, here's Lauren Laverne with Desert Island Discs. My castaway this week is Professor Angela Gallup. She's one of the country's leading...
Is it? Yeah. The southeast this morning. Many will then have a dry and fine day with plenty of sunshine, although a few scattered showers will move into the northwest later, a high of 14 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for Classic FM, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is Classic FM from Global.
Thank you, Dom, and entering one and all, welcome to Friday morning. The weekend and all that therein is nearly upon us. Let us fill this morning with glorious colour in readiness. I'm Alexander Armstrong, pushing off from the bank with Bach.
The world's greatest music.
Classic FM.